Hi, my name is Jacob Phillips, and I am going to tell you how continued officer misconduct affirms racially inequitable law enforcement practices. Does anybody know what that means? Is anybody here a racist? No. Oh, there we go. All right, cool. What I'm going to talk about is a very tender and unresolved issue about race in America. And that big long claim that I had needs to be defined. The very first word that in that sentence is continued. Continued officer misconduct. What do I say by continued? Does anybody know about race relations in the United States? Anybody? No? Got one? What do you know? Well, okay, give me landmark case. Landmark case would be Plessy versus Ferguson, no?
The Dred Scott case too.
Dred Scott case, of course. Now, Plessy versus Ferguson was a case that basically justified separate but equal Jim Crow laws. It lasted from 1864 to, actually no, I'm sorry, that's the Emancipation Proclamation. 1864, all the way to its end. This is from a PBS study of the Plessy versus Ferguson case. The court ruled that while the object of the 14th Amendment was to create absolute equality of the two races before the law, such equality extended only so far as political and civil rights. An example, voting and serving on juries. Not social rights, sitting on a railway car if one chooses. As Justice Henry Brown opinion put it, if one race be inferior to the other socially, the Constitution of the United States cannot put them upon the same plane. Racial discrimination is rampant in not only law enforcement agencies, but the judicial system, and it also backs it up, which is my first supporting claim. Racial discrimination in law enforcement agencies is deeply integrated by the judicial system. So after Plessy versus Ferguson, you had Cooper versus Aaron. Anybody heard of the Little Rock Nine? No. Orville Redenbacher. Anybody heard of him? Popcorn maker? Yeah, Orville Faubus has nothing to do with him. I just thought it was a funny anecdote. It's really not. Arkansas 9. There was 9 African American students who tried to enter Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. Orville Faubus was the governor of Arkansas and used the state National Guard to keep them from going to school. Okay, this happened in 1958. Do you know when we passed, what was it, separate but equal, shoot, I'm having trouble finding it here. Because I did have it. 1952.
Brown versus Board of Education, 1954,
Yes,
is that what you're looking for?
1954, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. So Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. 4 years later, you had Cooper versus Aaron. Now you're getting into, let's say, the Civil Rights Act and movement of 1964, which really brought to the nationwide attention the harsh realities of racial inequality. 1968, you had Terry versus Ohio. Now this is a court summary. Terry and 2 other men were observed by a plainclothes police officer, and the police officer believed to be casing a job and a stick-up. Officer stopped and frisked the 3 men who had weapons. Was this incident a violation of the 14th Amendment? Right. This case is valid because this is the backing for the stop and frisk policy. Anybody heard of the stop and frisk policy? It's going on rampantly in New York. You see cases like the Eric Garner case where they had accused him of selling loose cigarettes, which is basically, hey man, you got a quarter, I'll give you a cigarette. Silly stuff, really silly stuff. So it's stop and frisk policy, the definition by the Department of Justice, a brief, non-intrusive police stop of the suspect protected under the 14th Amendment. The officer must provide reasonable suspicion. That's a very vague term. They define it as facts viewed from the viewpoint of an objectively reasonable officer. What does a reasonable officer consist of? A just, rational, appropriate, ordinary, usual in the circumstances. These are all very, very, very vague terms to describe it. Basically, if an officer of the law can articulate why he stops somebody, he is justified in doing it. And this reoccurrence of racially motivated policing doesn't stop because judicial law reinforces it. Officer misconduct. What constitutes officer misconduct? I can't tell you because my time is over. Did anybody understand any of that? It was a little hard to follow. I think it was. A lot of my supporting claims weren't what they should have been. Basically, race relations in the United States are struggling. And it's not a new problem. I think it's just more publicized. I bet everybody has a phone in here. And I bet on the back of those phones you have a camera. And with the camera you can take any type of video you want. Problem isn't new, problem isn't growing, maybe it is. Anyways, thank you.
All right, Jake, you feel passionately about the issue, but I think that you need a lot more structure for the presentation. You probably know that yourself. You've got an idea here that there's something wrong, and you're looking at a variety of historical court cases to try and document and show that that injustice continues to exist. But you're having trouble connecting those cases to the contemporary situation that you're describing. There's uncertainty about what is going on in some of those cases. You struggle even remembering a couple of cases. That's problematic. You need to have a series of declarative statements that build to the claim, and basically when you said, oh, my first word is continuing, no, your first word was actually how, which makes it a question rather than a sentence or declarative statement. You just get rid of that how and you've got a clearer argument. We talked about this in one of the earlier speeches. Your argument needs to go something like, there continues to be rampant racial discrimination by police departments against ethnic groups in this country. Let's keep it simple. Make the claim very direct. Historically, this has been the case. That would be your first point. And we have cases that have tried to resolve this over the years, but they haven't been effective at doing that. We have contemporaneous examples that demonstrate that there is racial animus by police departments against ethnic groups. Blah, 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 blah. Here's these particular cases that you can point to. And maybe finally, the absence of any judicial solution means that this problem is going to continue. Great, then you're making some inferences. What you're trying to do is you're trying to riff on the cases. You're asking people questions, and they're not rhetorical questions. You want people to respond to your questions, and then you want to kind of turn it into a dialogue, and that's not really much of a speech. It's what they used to refer to as a encounter session or a rap session or something like that, and that's not really what we're looking for here. So you need to build something that is a little bit more forceful and declarative in your argument. I've got a vague idea of what some of the issues are that you see as being important, but ultimately you feel like you're wandering around on this subject, and I think it doesn't come out very clearly. At the end, you're off on some other tangents. You get sidetracked on a couple of points. Look, I appreciate that there's an Orville out there and who shares the name of the governor of Arkansas and the famous popcorn maker. There's also an Orville Wright, but he didn't get included in the discussion. So, it's an interesting side note, but it's not the point that you're trying to make. And that's, I think, one of the problems is you just kind of go off on these tangents in different directions instead of focusing laser-like on the point that you're trying to make. And it doesn't help your argument to develop very well. All right, thank you.